Hmm. Good morning, everyone. Today we are conducting a virtual talk on object-oriented programming with C++ for second year BCA students. It's a glorious moment to welcome our speaker, Dr. Lakshmi BN, Assistant Professor, Department of Computer Science and Engineering, BMS Institute of Technology and Management, Bengaluru. On behalf of Bapuji Institute of High Tech Education, I welcome you, madam.
Yeah, thank you.
The flags are flying, the balloons are ready for release. It's a great day, one we have been planning and waiting for. I'm sure you will conquer. This is an agreeable welcome. I would also like to welcome our second year BCA students and faculty members who are all joined to this virtual talk. She had received her Best Paper Award for the paper titled A Novel Health Monitoring Approach for Pregnant Women, presented in ICRE-CT, conducted on 19th December 2015 at PES College of Engineering, Mandya. She had also published one paper, a title like A Novel Healthcare System for Monitoring Fetal Heart Rate During Pregnancy. It was published by Jesuit Educational Society in Volume 4. She had published so many papers in national, international, as well as some of the conferences. There are 3 papers published in international journals and 13 papers presented in the international conferences, as well as she had 33 papers presented in national conferences. Once again, I would like to welcome you to the virtual session, madam. Now I will over to Lakshmi madam to continue the session.
Thank you, ma'am.
Welcome, madam. You can continue the session, madam.
Yes. Ma'am, can you just
Yes, madam. Is it? Yes, madam. It's visible. You can continue the session.
okay. A very good morning to all of you. I'm Dr. Lakshmi here. So today we are here to have a virtual session on C++ programming. So let's just start with the object C language in our academy. Background. Yeah,
Yes, madam. It's visible.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, first of all, why is C language so important nowadays? So we start up with, before we start up with C++, let us just see why C language is important. So C language cases are most of the Oracle related applications they are written in C. You have the core libraries of Android, which is written in C. And the database that we use, the MySQL, most of you would have known about this MySQL. This is also written in C. So you have these device drivers for your computers, which is written in C. So you have the web browsers. All of us use these web browsers, right? So these web browsers are also written in C languages. Major part of these web browsers are with C languages. You have the Unix operating system, which is usually developed with C, and you have the world's most popular programming language to be C, because most of the OS kernels which are in use today have C language as their base. So if we see from a student point of view, this was from an application point of view. So where all are we using C language? So when we see from a student's point of view, C is important to build programming skills. So until and unless if you people are from computer science, you people are all from computer science backgrounds. So if we have to, okay, if we have to sustain in the society, if we have to sustain in the market, that is if we have to sell ourselves, if we have to sell ourselves, how are we going to sell ourselves? We have to sell ourselves through our knowledge. So when we say we are going to enter a company, we are going to enter a company as a developer, we require the skills of programming, right? Because we need to develop applications, we need to develop games. There are different applications wherein we will be using the C language. As I mentioned earlier, as a developer, you might also be interested in developing the OS kernels here. So when you go into that particular field, you will require these programming skills. So from a student point of view, first a student should have these programming skills. He should know all the basics, or he or she should know all the basic features of all the programming in C. And this C language will be helpful for campus recruitment process, right? So all of you will have a campus recruitment process wherein you people will be asked about the questions with regarding to the programming languages when you want to become a software engineer, right? So this will also help out in giving you the basic knowledge of programming, because C is the very basic language for programming. So you have the other languages which is all based on this C language. So this is a popular language which is hardware dependent. Okay, so you do not have a C program which is dependent. Yeah. So when we see the classification of programming languages, this computer language, okay, C is also a computer language. So as a whole, when you take the computer language, this computer language is divided into low level, high level, advanced high level, okay. When you say these advanced high levels, you have the 4G and the 5G languages, okay. When you speak about this low level languages, these are the mission codes and the assembly languages, which are with regard to the intercommunication within the system, okay. The high level languages are usually problem oriented and the procedure oriented, and this is where we are speaking about the C and C++ languages and the other programming languages that you people will be learning further, okay. So when I say C language is a procedure oriented language which mostly concentrates on what is the procedure when when you're solving a certain problem, okay. What is the procedure that you follow? Coming to the history of C language, the C language was actually given by Martin Richards, who developed this language, the very basic combined programming language as it is named as, which was developed in 1966. So Martin Richards was the very first man to develop this basic combined programming language for a computer. Okay, this was further evolved. Okay, it was evolved, it was not developed, it was evolved. Okay, it was evolved by a developer named Ken Thompson, who who gave us the B language in 1969. So this B language was used to create the early versions of Unix. We all know about the Unix systems, right? So the early Unix operating system was developed by using this B language in the early 1969, and this was done by Ken Thompson. So I think all of you know that Dennis Ritchie was the developer of C language. So for Dennis Ritchie to develop this C language, he had to use he had to use both those languages that was given by these two men, Ken Thompson and Martin Richards. He used the basic combined programming language as well as the B language to give the features of these two languages to give you the C language. And this C language came into existence from 1972 at the AT&T Bell Labs in United States of America. So this Dennis Ritchie, he was also an Unix operating system co-developer who helped Martin who helped Martin and Ken develop the Unix systems. So when you give an overview of C, so let us see what is C of. Okay, what is C involved with? C is usually developed. It was developed by Dennis Ritchie, as we just saw now, and this is a structured programming language. So as I said, this is a procedure-oriented programming language. Okay, so it supports the functions which enables easy maintainability of the code. Okay, so in C programming, you see large files will be broken down into smaller modules. So you people, if you have known about C languages, if you have coded for C, okay, if you've written program codes for C, you see that we will have a lot of functions which will be mentioned for performing certain operations. Okay, when you have to add, subtract, when you have to find out the average. So these are all very simple examples wherein you will have functions for each one of it. Okay. C also provides a possibility wherein you can give comments. So this comments, say, why are these comments given in C? When you say you have a program written, okay, so I'm just deviating a little. So say you have a program written. So this program, you were in a certain company, you have written a program for a certain application, okay, and you haven't given any comments for that particular program. We all know that a program written by one developer is always difficult to be modified by another developer. So if you have to modify something done by another person, it is always difficult. I think all of you know about it. It is not only with regard to programming, it is regard to life also. So one mistake done by another is always difficult for another person to correct it, right? So say if you have a C program written and no comments given there, a developer who comes next, okay, a developer who occupies the same position of the person who had originally coded this particular program will find it difficult without the comments being mentioned. Okay, so here we have the C programming. It provides the possibility, it provides the comments to be given within a program. So this is a powerful language, and here we have a basic structure of the C program. So C program usually starts with #include stdio.h, which is the header file here. You have a main function here. So everything that you give within a main function is executed in a C program. So every C program should have a main function, which is the start for the execution of the program. Okay, so here we have a return type mentioned and a return type mentioned within the braces too. So we say that the main function returns nothing. When it returns nothing, you usually give it as void. Okay, we will learn about this further. So this is a basic structure of a C program wherein it starts with a header file. You have a void main here. You have a set of statements mentioning what the program has to do, what is the operation it has to do. Okay, and it also allows you to mention functions, which is not given here. We will first learn about the functions and see how the program code runs. Okay, so these statements which come within the void main function, they form the body of the void main function, which will start the execution from the main function. Okay, the main function, when it returns nothing, you give it as void. So you will have no arguments here. So you can give, if there are any arguments, you can give the arguments within the braces. Since we are not giving any arguments, this will not be, the main will not be receiving any arguments here. Okay. So when we speak about the advantages of C programming, so this is a powerful and a flexible language. It's a portable programming language, and this language usually has a very few keywords. So when you people code using C language, you see that they have very few, a handful of terms called keywords within a C language. Okay? And this is a modular language wherein you will have routines which are called as functions. And in case of C++, these will be classes. Okay, these routines or functions, they can be reused by other applications or programs. So we learned what is C languages. We said C language is powerful, it is flexible, it is portable, right? It has very less keywords, it's a modular language. Then why is there a need for C++? So when we speak about some concepts of inheritance, polymorphism, abstraction, so all these concepts are not dealt with a C language. And C language is a procedure programming language. It's a procedural programming language which will execute a series of procedures in a sequential fashion. Okay. So here a C language always follows a top-down approach of the programming, and the major focus here is about the procedures or functions. So you have a set of functions, you have the main also as a function. So main concentration is about the procedures here. And here the possibility of data hiding is not it isn't there, and you cannot have complex problems solved with C programming. Okay, so you need the concepts of C++, wherein the features of C are maintained and additional features like classes, objects, encapsulations, inheritance, polymorphisms, these features are added on to the C programming concepts. Okay, and a new language called C++ is evolved. So this is an extension of the C programming language because there is a need for the features like encapsulation, abstraction, inheritance. Okay, so all these are required when you have to code, when you have to develop applications which have complex computations. Okay. So C++, this is not a procedure-oriented programming language. This is an object-oriented programming language. So wherein you will have a collection of objects mentioned within a class. Okay. So this was developed by Jarnes Trostrup in 1979 at the Bell Laboratories, and he called this language to be a C language with classes. As I mentioned earlier, so this is an object-oriented programming language which considers the concepts of objects and classes. Okay, so it has all the C's features, all its attributes, all its benefits. It is only an extension of C language, wherein a C++ language will support object-oriented programming, which involves classes, inheritance, function overloading, and operator overloading. So many new features like I said, the abstractions, the inheritance, encapsulations, polymorphisms, all these are the new features that will be included to the C language to give you the C++ language. So as we see in a C language, we usually use the printf and the scanf statements for input and output. So here in C++, in C++, there is a slight deviation wherein C out and C in will be used for input and output. Okay. So C++ applications are like editors, databases, personal file systems, network utilities, and communication programs. Okay. So the efficiency of C is also shared by C++, and it provides more high performance. It provides more performance to the system softwares when you are constructing these systems with C++. Okay, because elevated features will be provided here, which are not provided by C programming language. So we just now I just mentioned that C++ is an object-oriented programming language, right? So what is object-oriented programming? So this represents the program in terms of, it represents a system in terms of objects, which will have data fields. By data fields, I mean they are the attributes of the objects. Okay. So these attributes, they will be associated with procedures. These procedures can also be known as methods. So I mean, say, we take a student to be an object. Okay. A student, one student to be an object. So this student will have a set of attributes, right? A student will have a name, he will have a USN or he will have a register number. He might have a phone number. Okay. He will have a address. He will have a semester. He will have a section. So all these become the attributes of the student. Fine. So when you say the procedures or the methods here, these are the operations that can be performed by a student or on a student. A student can study, a student can have a set of marks, right, which can be evaluated. He can have an answer script which has to be evaluated. So these are all the operations that can be performed on the attributes, the data fields, okay, of the students. So here object oriented programming is everything that you consider for programming here will be taken as objects. So these objects put together will give you a program code. Okay. So here when I say an object, okay, so each student in your college or in any other educational institute will constitute to be an object. So all these objects will have a set of attributes which are common. I mean the attribute names. So a student will have a name, he will have a semester, he will have a register number. So let us just take three examples for time being. So these are the three attributes of a particular student. So these three attributes are common to all the students, right? So all these students can be grouped into a particular class, right? They can be grouped into a particular class. So that is what I meant. Object oriented programming here considers the concepts of class and objects. So a class will give you a general view of a set of objects here. Okay. So the attributes that are common over a set of objects will be considered within a class. So I am speaking about attributes and the methods here, right? So attributes here become the data fields. That is the variables that you're going to give, right? The variables will be the attributes here. When you are programming, you all start with the main function, right? After the main function, a set of variables are declared. They are initialized. So this initialization happens with a set of variables mentioning what is the data type that they consider, right? So the data types that they have, okay, the features of the C, all are maintained here, okay. As I said earlier, the concept of object and class, okay. So when I say an object, this will be an instance or it will be an entity when a program is executing, right? Say we give a for loop here. I hope you people are comfortable with C language, C programming. So consider we are giving a for loop, a conditional loop here. Okay, we are giving a for loop here. When we give a for loop, we say the values range from 0 to n. So we are taking a range of n elements there, right? From 0 to n, we are initializing the values there, right? So when we say these entities during the execution of the program, the program code or the segment that is written to perform certain operation will be taking each instance, each number, each entity to process the code that is written below, right? To perform the action that is written below. So, an object will be a basic runtime entity when you consider an object oriented programming. So, for example, let us take the cars, the person, the bank accounts. Each bank account is corresponding to one person, right? So each bank account will be an entity. It will be an object of the class called bank account. Okay. So here the object will have a set of attributes and they will have a set of behaviors. By attributes, I mean the data, the variables that you give in programming, right? So I mentioned earlier, that is the name, the USN, that is the register number, okay, the phone number. These are all unique for each entity, each student, right? So when you're writing a particular program code for a student database, okay, say you're writing a particular code for a student database, you mention the attributes of each student. So instead of mentioning the attribute for each student, you collectively mention a set of attributes which are common for a set of students, okay? So you mention, so for name you can mention it takes a character, you can give it as an array also. Okay, mentioning the set of characters that the array can take for the variable name, the register number, and the phone number. So phone number is an integer character, so it is an integer type, that is the data type. You can give it as int, and for register number, if it is an alphanumerical attribute, you will have to give it as strings. Okay, so coming back to the presentation here, so here we have mentioned the car to be an object here. So we have different cars, there are n number of cars, n number of companies giving out cars, right? Each car has its own set of features, but all the cars, when you take it collectively, have a set of features that are common, right? So here we take the attribute to be the color and the speed. Okay. So in programming, attributes will be the variables and behaviors will be the functions that we define. So let us take an example of adding two numbers. Okay. So we are saying that, or let us take an example of a shape. Okay. So there are different shapes. Each shape corresponds to be an entity of the class called shape. So each shape will have a length and breadth. So length and breadth will be the attributes. Okay, they will be the variables. So you can give it as int length and int breadth, right? Int length and breadth can be given, right? And what would be the operation that we are going to do? For each shape, there is a different operation that we can perform, right? So if it is a square, you're going to find, you can find out the area of each of it, right? So area will be the behavior. It will be the, you can define a function for area. So that will be the behavior of a shape, okay? So as I mentioned, objects are the runtime entities and the collection of all the similar objects will give you a class. So under a class, you can mention all different entities of that particular class, which are the objects of that particular class having similar attributes. So these objects, apart from being within the class, can also have their own set of attributes, but they will be grouped into a particular class to make it easier in identifying the objects belonging to a particular class. Okay, so when you say mangoes, apples, okay, strawberries, so all these are different kinds of fruits. So all these can be the objects having different attributes, having different behaviors, that is different functions defined for them, but they can be collectively grouped into a similar category called fruit, a class called fruit. Okay, so this is about objects and class. So we will go in detail of how we can give, how we can define an object, or how we can define a class while you're programming. Okay, so some of the features that are provided by C++ are encapsulation, inheritance, and polymorphism. So when I say encapsulation, this is, you will be wrapping up the data and the functions into a single unit. Okay. So I mean, if you're defining, we mentioned that we will have a set of objects within a particular class, right? So when you're writing a program for a class, you will have the set of variables and the functions that is defined for that particular class within that particular class, and these variables and functions will not be accessible by any other class that you define within a program. Okay, so when you do this, when you wrap up the data and the functions into a single unit, this is called encapsulation. So the data here will not be accessible by the other class. By outside world, I mean it will not be accessible by the other classes or other functions that are mentioned within the classes. Okay. So only the functions which will be given within a class, that is within the class that wraps these functions and the data, will be able to access the data of that particular class. Okay. The second feature is inheritance. So this is wherein you will have a set of classes. So we'll see how we can define classes here, but we will just learn what are the features that C++ offers. So inheritance is wherein you will have, see when you're programming, you can have n number of classes mentioned. Okay. You can have a class for fruits, you can have a class for animals, you can have a class for shapes, you can have a class for students, you can have a class for faculty. So you can have different number of classes based on the application that you are programming for. You can have a set of classes there mentioned. So each class will have its own set of attributes, it will have its own set of behavior. I mean, it will have its own set of variables and it will have its own sets of functions. Okay. So when you have n number of classes here, there might be some classes wherein you will have one class inheriting some of the attributes and the functions of another class. Okay. So it will be inheriting, it will be accessing the properties, the variables and the functions that belong to another class. Okay. So apart from having its own set of attributes and its own set of data, it might, I'm sorry, it might access its own, it will access the data and the functions belonging to an other class. Okay. So when this happens, this particular property wherein one class, a new class will be created which will be using the attributes or the variables and functions of another class, that is the older class from which this class has been derived from, is called as inheritance. This is a property that the classes have and this is a property that is offered by C++. Okay. The third property or the third feature that C++ offers is polymorphism. Okay. So say we are speaking about the functions, the methods that we are giving, right? So say a particular method can have different forms. So it can have different forms. So you can add two numbers, you can add three numbers. I think all of you know how you can define a function in a program, right? So when you define a function in a program, you have a set of arguments that you will have to give within a function, right? So these set of arguments that you give, when you defer these arguments, you will be giving rise to the feature of polymorphism. So this feature is allowed in C++, but this is not allowed in C programming, right? So when you're adding two numbers, you have the parameters that can be given, which will give you the return type as well as the data to be mentioned within the parenthesis, right? So when you do that, when you defer these arguments, you give rise to polymorphism. So when you defer them, a single function can be used in multiple forms. It can be used for two data variables, it can be used for 3, 4, 5. So you can defer these arguments. So when you do this, when you use one method in multiple forms, this is called as polymorphisms. So it will allow us to have more than one function having the same name in a program, okay, but performing different functions, different operations. So why do we have, why object oriented programming or C++ is chosen over C? Because when you use C++, you can use certain program segments again in another application, for another application. This can be used. So this is called code reusability. So one class code, because you will have n number of objects, n number of functions defined for a certain class. So this will allow code reusability. So this class can, as it is, be used for an other application. Okay. So you will be allowing data hiding here. Okay, because as we discussed earlier, when you are wrapping the data that belongs to a certain class within that particular class and not giving access to other classes or other programs to access those data and functions, you will be hiding that information within a particular class, right? So data hiding is allowed with C++, which will not give access to any external functions which are not within the class to access the data of that particular class. And when you have to initialize variables, okay, when you have to declare variables, this can be done dynamically with C++. It need not mean, it doesn't tell you that the variables have to be declared at the very beginning of the program. Okay, so variables can be declared, variables and functions can be declared dynamically here. The maintenance of C++ programs is much easier when you consider C programs, and the software complexity here will be reduced because you will be grouping the functions and you will be allowing the concept of polymorphism and inheritance here, wherein the classes can use the data and the functions of other classes, and a function can be declared in n number of different ways. Okay, so the complexity of the software will be reduced here, and the upgradation of this particular C programming can be done from small to large systems. So say you have coded a C++ program for a small system, this can be scaled to a larger system. Okay. So a basic structure of a C++ program includes the header files, class declarations, function definitions, and then the main function. So in C programming, you had to mention everything within the main function, right? But here you can declare the classes outside the main function and call the classes within the main function. So you can have the function definitions outside a class or within the class too. So here there is a concept of um, providing the access specifiers to data and functions. So you can give the public and the private access specifiers, public, private and protected access specifiers here, which tells you how the access to the data and the functions are. Okay. So here the initialization of the variable, it follows the same procedure as C programming. Okay, you can initialize it in these ways here. You can either initialize with giving a equals to 5, or you can initialize it by mentioning the value of a particular variable within the parenthesis. So these are the three different ways wherein you can initialize the variables. And as I mentioned earlier, okay, you can mention the way you're going to input the data and view the data. Okay, the commands that are used in C++ differ from C programming. There we would use printf for giving the data, right, for entering the data, right? So here we use cout, and for scanf, in place of scanf we use cin. Okay, these are the basic input and output commands that we use in C++ languages. Okay, so here you can see something called a namespace, right? So in C++ programming, this is an additional feature wherein while you're programming, while you're writing a program in C++, you can save a particular program in a particular location of the memory. So when you give using namespace, okay, and you give the name of that particular namespace, the data or the program will be automatically saved in a special location that is created in the memory with the name std. Okay, so it saves it in the particular namespace. Okay, this is a simple program wherein you will be entering an integer value and displaying that particular integer and double value. Okay, so this is again a simple program here for giving an output called hello world. So here we spoke about the comments that are allowed in C programming. So comments in C++, it supports two ways of commenting here, either through when you're giving a line comment, a single line comment, you can give it in this particular form. If you're giving a block comment, okay, if you have to mention, if you have to give a description of a particular statement, a block comment can be given with a bar and a star on both sides of the description. So coming to the features of C++. So these are the different data types that the C++ programming allows. It allows the character that is allowed in C programming. You have a wide character here. You have an integer, the float, double, boolean and void. So these are the different data types that will be allowed in a C++ programming. So character, we all know that this is used for an 8-bit ASCII character. The W character key, holds the character that are part of large character sets. The integers represent integer numbers having no fractional parts, so you will not have any decimal points here. It will not be accepting any decimal point values here. And floating point, these are used for real numbers wherein you have a precision of 7 digits. So after the decimal point, around 7 digits are allowed with a floating point. With double, you have the real numbers with a precision of 15 digits, and boolean, you have only two possible values. When you give a boolean variable, you will have two values, either it is a true or a false value. Okay. So when you give a particular variable with a void value or a function with a void value, it means that it has no value. So no return type, no return value is expected. Okay. So how you define the variables in C++ is same as you define the variables in C programming. So a variable will be a named area in a memory which will be used to store the values while you're executing a program. And these variables, they will be runtime entities. So the variables will have values, right? So these will be the runtime entities here. They will have a symbolic name and they can be given a different values. We all know based on the data type, the variables can be given different values. So the values may be initialized well in before the start of the program, or the values can be assigned throughout the execution of the program. So apart from the data types that we use, we can also give the variables as constants. So these constants, they refer to the fixed values for a particular variable which will not change throughout the program. Okay. So any data type can be used along with a constant here. Okay. So the different operators that we have are the arithmetic operators, the relational operators, the logical operators. So here the arithmetic operators are the plus, minus, star, divided by and the percentage. The relational operators are lesser than, greater than, greater than or equal to, lesser than or equal to, okay, not, not equal to. All these are the relational operators that we will be using in C++ or C language. So all the operators that are allowed in C programming will be allowed in C++ too. So the logical operators are the AND, the OR and the NOT that we use in C++. The same will be used in, in C, will be used in C++ also. Okay. So here the logical operators will be combining one or more relational expressions. Okay. And you have the assignment operators, that is the equal, which will be used to assign a variable with its value, initialize a variable. And you have the increment and the decrement operators. So these are the two special operators, the increment and the decrement, which will be incrementing or decrementing the value by 1 for a particular variable. Okay. a variable having a certain value, when you use the increment or the decrement operator, the variable value will be increased or decreased by 1. Okay. So this increment operator, it can be used with any type of a variable, it can be any kind of a variable, and it will not be used with a constant, because a constant will always have a static value throughout the program. You have a question mark to be the conditional operator, which will be called a ternary operator, which requires 3 operands here. So when you have a condition to be satisfied, you will be using these conditional operators, which will have 2 conditions. So one expression and the second expression for a particular condition to be satisfied. So there are 3 operands for a conditional operator. So coming to the functions in C++. So we all know about the functions in C programming. We define the functions in C programming, right? And call the functions within the main. So the functions can be defined outside the main, right? With C++, you can have the functions defined outside the main function, or you can also have the functions defined within the classes if these functions are intended for the use of particular data variables belonging to a certain class. Okay. So the functions will have this code which will be stored in only one place in the memory. You can have these functions executed many times. Okay. So these functions, they will have 3 parts: function declaration, function definition, and function call. Okay. So when I say function declaration, you will have when you're declaring a function, when you're writing a function, you will have what is the value that will be returned by the function. So you can give a void, you can give an int. What is the value that will be returned by the function? The function name will be given, and a list of parameters will be given. So this is where I told you the concept of polymorphism comes into effect. Okay. So the parameter list that we give here, when you change the list of parameters, so you can say we say void add, okay, and I give a list of parameters saying int a, int b, int c for a particular function add. Okay. So I can take 3 values for the variables a, b, and c here. 3 values for the variables can be declared by the user, can be given by the user, or it can be initialized within a function. Okay, or it can be taken from a class. So from anywhere you can take the values. 3 values can be taken for the 3 variables a, b, and c. But when you have the concept, when you want this addition to be performed for 2 variables, we say here in engineering we are considering 3 internal marks. Okay, so we have to calculate the average of these 3 internal marks. Say a particular student has not attended the 3rd internal marks and the marks are not assigned for that particular student, or for a particular semester only 2 internals will be considered and the 2 internal marks have to be added. It has to be averaged. So when we take an example of this kind, so we have to define 2 different functions for this. So wherein both the functions will be doing the same job of calculating the average, but they have 2 different types of parameters that they have to consider. That is the list of parameters that they will have to consider. Okay. So defining these 2 functions with defining the same function with 2 different types of parameters will give you the concept of polymorphism. So I say void add parameter list, I put int a and int b, int c. Okay, and then again I call void add int a and int b. Okay, now I am leaving out int c there. Okay, when I do that, so I am using the same function but different list of parameters. So they are doing 2 different kinds of operations. Fine. Or I can also give it as, I can change the parameter list. Instead of calling A, B, and C, I might call C and D, where C and D will have different values for the same operation to be done. So for adding, I can say add, and I can give those 2 variables here. Okay. So here is a function wherein we are finding out the factorial of n numbers. Okay. So here always we start a C++ program. The header for a C++ program is always IO stream. That is the input and output stream. that is to be given through the header file. Okay, and we are giving a particular function called int factorial n. So here we are not speaking, speaking about the classes and objects here. This is similar to a C program wherein a function is defined. Okay, so this is the definition of the function wherein int factorial is defined within the int main. So here we are just declaring a function here, but we are defining the function within the main function. Okay, and we are asking to return the factorial of this particular number. So coming to the concept of class. So these were all the features that C++ programming usually provides. Okay, coming to the concept of class. I hope all of you know about C programming, wherein you people will be using the concept of structure. Okay, so structure here, you know that we will be defining a set of variables and the data, I mean the functions within the structure, right? But these variables and the functions that we give within a structure will be public. And here in structures, the same format that you follow for a structure is the format that you give for a class. Okay, so a class will have a name, but here you will be having a struct and a name for the structure, right? In the class, when you give it in C++, you will have class and a class name will be given for the class here. Okay, so you will have a set of data variables and functions defined within a structure which can be used anywhere in the program. So when you use a when you use a structure, it means that all the data variables and the functions given within the function will be used in the program wherever you have called for that particular structure. The same way a class can be called. Okay, a structure here will be having the members which are public in nature. So all the members of the structure can be accessed by the external functions here. Okay, and there will not be a concept of inheritance here. So C programming doesn't allow the concept of inheritance here. Okay, and there is no concept of constructors, and it contains only data members. So only data members within a structure will be mentioned. Okay, when you say a class, you will have both the data members as well as the functions mentioned within the class. And here within a class, you will have the concept of constructors being used, wherein these constructors will help in initializing the variables wherein you have not initialized the variables. Okay, say when you're writing a C program, you have declared a variable I, but throughout the program you are not using I till the end, and you have not initialized the value of I, but in some place you call for that I and you ask to display the value of I. Okay, so you have not initialized any value to I, and at the end you are performing some operation using I and asking to display for the result. Okay, so when you do this, when you have not initialized a value for a certain variable, it takes the garbage value as its value and performs the operation with this garbage value. So sometimes what happens when such a scenario exists, you will have the entire system crashing. So you will have the entire system on halt. Okay, the system might crash because we use this C programming language for developing the Unix systems as well as the operating systems, right? So when such a scenario exists, you might have the system crashing. So to avoid such a situation, in C++ we use the concept of constructors and destructors. Okay, so these constructors, they will be used to initialize the objects. They will be used to initialize the variables. Okay. So here is a abstract structure of the class here. So a class can be, the data members of the class can be either mentioned as private, public or protected. Okay. When I mention it as private, so when I mention a set of variables and functions as private, it means that no other class in the entire program can access these data members of the class that is having its data members uh, mentioned as private. Okay. So when I say public, so this is accessible by any program, or it is accessible by any program, it is accessible by any function within the program here. Okay. So when I say protected, it means that only the classes which are the friend classes of this particular class which has its data members mentioned as protected can access the variables, okay, and functions. So coming to the concept of friend class, a class which will access the data members of its friend class of another class will be a friend class of this class. Okay, a friend class is always mentioned in a class. So you will have a friend class mentioned in a class. So you will have this particular class accessing the data values, sorry, the data variables and the functions that belong to the class by this particular class. Okay. And you have the concept of nested classes here. So I said there can be n number of classes, right? So classes need not be mentioned separately. So when you have some of the classes to be mentioned within another class, you can have a set of nested classes. So you have a class test given there, okay? You have a set of data that will be given, and you can mention another class within this class having it as average marks. Okay. Another class called average marks can be mentioned within the class called test. Okay. So when you have classes within many classes within another class or a class within another class, these classes are called as nested classes. So this is an example of a structure and a class here. So here you can see you will even within you will have the sorry, this is a structure of a class that you can give. You can give the access specifier here. Access specifier is nothing but whether you're giving it as public, private or protected. What is the access specifier you're giving? The data and the functions within it. Okay, you can have n number of data variables mentioned here and n number of objects list after the class has completed. Okay, so declaration of the class happens with an open braces and a closed braces here, and the object list is always given after the closed braces. Okay, wherein you have to mention specific objects belonging to that particular class. You will be giving the object list here. Okay, so here is an example. This is a structure of a class. Here is an example wherein you are giving a class for my class. You have the class declaration here. So you say int a. Okay, int a to be a private member here. Okay, you're giving a public for setting a to int num, and you are returning the value for a. Okay, you're getting the value for a from this particular class here. So here you can see an example, a better example here, wherein you have a class declaration. So we are declaring a class called my class here. So when you are declaring a class, you give it as class and give the class name, and you declare the variables here, say int a. So for int a, we haven't given any access specifier. So it means that int a is public. Okay. So here we have a constructor called my class, which will by default be used here. Okay. There is a function called void show that is mentioned within the my class here. Okay. So you see that there are two semicolons mentioned here. This is a scope resolution notation that is used, which will tell you that a particular class belongs to, uh, just a minute. I'm sorry, ma'am. I had a call from the college. I'm very sorry for the inconvenience. Yeah. Yes. So this is a basic structure of the class wherein you will have the concept of constructors here. Constructors are the basic, they are by default, they initialize the values for a particular variable. Okay, when you are defining a constructor, the object is always given a value of 0. So when you use constructors, this see to it that the objects do not take a null value. Okay. Yeah, first let us see what are constructors and destructors. So constructors, these will be used for initializing the variables. These are the special functions, okay, which will initialize the value for the variables. So that the variables do not take these garbage values, okay. When you don't initialize a value for a variable, it usually takes the garbage value, whatever the value that is saved in the memory location which is assigned to that particular variable, that value will be taken by this, that value will be taken by the variable. So to avoid this situation, we use the constructors, which are special functions for initializing the values to the variables. Okay, these automatically are created when you have a new object that is being created, and these destructors will have the same name of the class name. So when you have a constructor called, you can see in the previous example. So you have a constructor called my class here, right? This my class will be used for all the objects within the my class object. Okay. So these constructors do not have a return type. They do not return anything here. These constructors are only used for initializing the variables with some 0 value. Okay. And when you have these constructors defined, okay, within a class you can also have the destructors defined, which will destroy the objects that are created of that particular class after the function of that particular class is completed. Okay. So when you have to destroy a particular object, you use the destructors here. When the function which has a destructor mentioned ends, the objects which belong to that particular function will be destroyed automatically when you call a destructor. Okay. These destructors too have the same name of the class name, but they have a negate symbol. Okay. Tilde symbol appending them. Okay. So these destructors, they will be used when an object assigns dynamic memory. So it assigns dynamic memory to its variable. So it will have a dynamic memory there. So these are the situations wherein these destructors will be used, because there will be some objects which would assign these memories dynamically, but the entire object would not be used in the rest of the program. So these objects have to be deleted, wherein they are required only when the particular function which has mentioned the use of that object to be present there. Okay. For the rest of the program, you will not be using that particular object. So that object will be deleted once the function's operation is completed. So the uses of or the applications of C++, why should we learn C++? Okay. So application of C++ is vast. So C++ is used in games. It is used in graphical user interface based applications, when you have to develop database softwares, for developing the operating systems. So as I mentioned earlier, all the browsers, most of the browsers, a part of most of the browsers use the C++ languages. Okay. You have advanced computation and graphics. You have banking applications which are based on C++. Okay. You have cloud and distributed systems which work on C++ programming language. The base for those systems are the C++ languages. And we all know about the compilers. The compilers are the whole and soul language that is used for developing the compilers is C++. The embedded systems and the enterprise softwares, all these are based on C++ languages, and all the libraries that are used by the programming language, they are all based on the C++ programming language. So that is the end of my presentation. I couldn't complete a lot of features here. Whatever was possible was dealt with.
Thank you so much, madam.
Yeah, ma'am. If
I
anyone
would
has
like I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the speaker, Dr. Lakshmi BN, for accepting our invitation in spite of her busy schedule and for sharing her valuable knowledge with our students. Thank you so much, madam.
thank you, ma'am.
I would also like to thank all our students who sincerely committed to this event to make it as a success. Thank you, one and all, who are all present here. Once again, I